Like, this is the extent of their evaluation to diagnose depression. Oh, are you depressed? Yes. Are you having thoughts of suicide? No. Diagnosis, depression.
Guys, I am so excited right now to be coming at you with our very first episode of our podcast. Yes, you're probably as shocked as I am. Well, our first episode, we have an absolute doozy of an episode. It's Dr. Andrew Kaufman. He is a good friend of mine. I am so thankful to be standing in the foxhole with this dude. He's extremely sharp-minded, extremely brilliant-minded. He has a ton of information to give in this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Please like and share this episode. We are trying to get the truth out there to the people. This podcast, the whole goal of this podcast is to bring the truth to the people. We have been so silenced, so censored by the government. You know, they are afraid of what we have to say. Just like the quote by George Martin, he said, if you cut out a man's tongue, you don't prove him a liar, but you are fearful of what he might have to say. Guys, this is our podcast. It's going to be rocky. It's going to be bumpy. You know, I'm not an expert podcaster, so we are trying to do our best by getting the information out and doing the best we can at just having conversations with people, with truth seekers, with the people that are out there standing in the foxhole, fighting the fight. Guys, this podcast is bacon for the ears and medicine for the soul. Like, subscribe, share. We love you guys. Please, if you want to show us some love and support, you can even subscribe. We do have a paid subscription for just some exclusive episodes. 80% of our episodes are going to be free, but there are going to be some episodes that will be behind a paywall. But again, you are going to support us in this fight. So that being said, this is not medical advice. This is just my opinions, my thoughts. And so yeah, take that with a grain of salt. Love you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And here's episode 1 with Dr. Andy. To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring your cell phone.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
I am with my good friend, colleague, Dr. Andy Kaufman. I am so excited to be sitting here with you, my friend. We're kicking off our podcast here, and I am so honored to be here with you. You've been a hero of mine for a long time, Dr. Andy. We're brothers from different mothers, and we have a lot in common. You stood in the gap here during Crony Baloney, and you've been in the fight and the good fight and the tip of the spear for a long time. But I do have a little bio I want to read about you. So first of all, thank you for sitting down with me and wanting to sit down with me. I'm very honored because we have a lot to talk about, a lot to uncover here. But before I do this, I want to just read a little bit about who we're sitting down with today. So Dr. Andy is a self-proclaimed recovering physician who broke all the rules, which is why I like you, and to lead a privileged career in mainstream medicine. Dr. Andy became more and more skeptical of the allopathic paradigm until he finally blew the germ theory wide open and became a COVID whistleblower. That's why we get along so well, Dr. Andy. He's been speaking and teaching truth about medicine, viruses, and natural healing, and other important subjects such as economics, law, education, and science. He got his bachelor's at MIT, an MD from University of South Dakota, and did his psychiatric residency at Duke. Okay, Dr. Andy, tell me, are you a Duke fan?
No, not particularly, to be honest with you. I don't really follow spectator sports so much, but when I was there, of course, I did want to get in and see a game, which was impossible, but I was able to get in and see the Tar Heels right across town in Chapel Hill. So that was worthwhile. But I did develop a relationship actually with the team psychiatrist, or the team doctor, for the basketball team, working with Coach K and whatnot. And he had some interesting stories about what really goes on, with the players and the team behind the scenes.
Well, that was kind of a trick question. I wanted to make sure because I have lost all interest in following mainstream sports. And if you're one of those people that do, I'm not here to judge you. But during COVID, you remember like how they had cutouts of cardboard people in the audience during Corona Baloney, and when that happened, I was like, dude, I'm done. I used to get so excited for college basketball, and I just gave it all up. And now I'm just like, okay, now we're fighting the good fight. There's other things. My interests have, I'm like you in a sense where I just diverted and woke up and left this whole mainstream and following the crowd and conforming to all of that and just left. So I think we have a lot in common. So for you to say going to Duke and saying you're not following that, I have a lot of respect for that.
Well, I didn't go there for the sports, that's for sure. But, obviously when I was younger too, I was into sports, especially baseball. I played baseball growing up, fairly competitively. And I think, I like sports. I encourage my kids to play sports, but I think that it's to participate in, not to watch, right? That because it provides a way for us to learn how to, one, deal with competition, which is probably more important for boys and men, and also how to, get past the adversity. Like, if you play sports, you're going to be hurting at some point, or you're going to be exhausted, right, out of breath, but yet you have to keep going. And in fact, sometimes in those situations, push even harder. And that helps you develop that kind of resistance and resilience that serves you well in many other areas of life.
What position did you play in baseball?
I was a pitcher and played a little third base when I wasn't pitching.
How fast can you throw?
I mean, back then, around 80 miles an hour, but I was really a control pitcher. I was not a speed pitcher, and I didn't throw junk, but I could place the ball like at any corner, anytime.
That's awesome. Could you throw a knuckleball?
I never threw one in a game, but I did have a split finger fastball.
Heck yeah, dude. I love watching those guys that throw knuckleballs. It's amazing. It's my favorite thing. I'm not like a huge baseball fan, but sometimes I'll go and watch knuckleballs. I'm just like, oh, it's so cool.
Well, as a hitter, right, you can get fooled with a knuckleball one time. But if you're astute, you won't. The second time, it'll essentially be like a meatball.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Well, I grew up playing baseball too, and I always wanted to be a pitcher. I think at a young age, everybody wants to be the pitcher. The problem is I couldn't throw faster than 60 miles an hour. So I was trying for speed, but that's all I had was a slow cheese ball that was wild, and I could never make it in the strike zone. So
see, I was the kid. They put me in catcher first because I was the one who could reach second base, and then that morphed into pitching. Just because, like you said, I mean, a lot of kids, I mean, even adults, don't necessarily just have natural throwing mechanics to throw it hard and accurate.
Right. Well, Dr. Andy, when did you graduate from South Carolina?
That was in 2004 when I finished medical school.
Okay. So I was going to say like last year. I mean, just the way you look so young. I was thinking maybe just recently. So
it must be my dark beard.
That's it. And I know you get mistaken for Brad Pitt all the time too. I know we talked about that. So what is that like? Tell me about
that. Well, I have to just basically hide out around the ladies.
Yeah, good. People ask for your autograph, for Brad Pitt's autograph, or no? Okay. I'm just kidding. But Andy, do you have any kids, Andy?
Yeah, I have 3 kids.
Oh man. So tell me what your dad life's like.
Well, I mean, that is definitely the highlight of my life. And I see it as really my raison d'etre for almost everything I do. So, I work from home now, doing this kind of work, and my consultations are remote. I do I do travel a bit to do in-person speaking engagements, but mostly being at home offers me the ability to interact with my kids throughout the day. So, I always take a lunch break. I touch base with them in the morning. My son and I work out together several days a week, depending on what we're doing with our workout schedule. And then in the evenings we get to spend more time doing something together, or many evenings I'm driving them somewhere to some sport or youth group or something like that. And then I am blessed to have a 1-year-old as well. His mom has him visiting grandparents right now, but he's, you interact with him in a different way. And of course, he requires more time, and being able to see him throughout the day and be involved in a lot of things as a father is really a blessing. When my older kids were younger, they're 12 and 15 now. It was, I was working. In fact, when my daughter was young, I had a startup technology company. So I was, I did limit it so I would have some time with the family, but it was a different experience. And it's great having this kind of, life where you can have a profession, and be able to support your family, but also in the context of being with them, not going to, I never worked in a cubicle, but many people do, or in a factory, or, a hospital is a horrible place to be. So when I worked, in hospitals, that was definitely a very aversive environment. And it's, I feel really blessed to be so close proximity and able to interact with my family, so much.
Dude, I love that. I think the older we get, the wiser we get. Not everybody, but, especially being in healthcare, I used to give health talks all the time. I would give health talks around to these different companies, and I have given hundreds of health talks over the years locally, even before COVID. And I remember giving a health talk, and I told patients, I would tell the people, hey, health is your greatest asset. And I would say that. And then I had this guy that came up to me. He was obese. He had comorbidities, you name it. He had all this stuff going on. He came up to me, he could barely breathe. And he's sitting there and he goes, I'm going to challenge you, and health's not your greatest asset. And I had this ego, and I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, this guy's going to teach me something. And then, and he asked me a question. He said, well, what can health buy? And I sat there and I looked at him and I said, dude, you're exactly right. Health can buy time. He goes, time is your greatest asset. And he goes, no, I'm not, he kind of admitted he's not the healthiest of people, but it makes you realize, like, time is our greatest asset. So I love the fact that you prioritize what's important to you, because a lot of dads want to do that. A lot of men want to do that. They're stuck in the rut. They're stuck in these jobs they're unhappy with. They don't have the courage or boldness, or maybe the know-how to get out of that rut, to step out of that and really be the dad or the man that they're supposed to be. And, and that's kind of the journey I've been on as well. During COVID, I realized what's most important is my kids. I had a clinic, it was thriving. We had a wait list of a month long. My schedule was completely packed. And it's like, when I started out, that's what I wanted. I wanted all this. I wanted to be as busy and see as many people as I can. And I was there to serve, and I wanted to be super successful, but being successful is really a relative question, because what did I really want was time with my children, time with my family, because I have baby number 5 coming, which is awesome. All my kids have an O name, and I always used to joke and said, if we have one more, name it Oops. Well, the joke's on me, because we're having baby. If it's a boy, it's named Oops. If it's a girl, it's Oopsie Daisy, right? But, and so I'm very thankful and thank the Lord we have another baby coming, because I thought we were done. I literally prayed a week before my wife told me that she's pregnant. I asked the Lord, how many kids do you want us to have? And he said, and he answered that prayer in a big way, because my wife a week later said, hey, I'm pregnant. So I was like, wow, that was an answered prayer. So I love your story, because I feel like we are on parallels. And, I just want to know, and really just kind of give a background, and from how you left that hospital, when you had this catalyst, like, wow, maybe we've been deceived, maybe we've been lied to, maybe we've been, that you just felt like there was a conviction in your heart and your spirit to say, you know what, I need to go from this, and I need to be a pioneer in this. So kind of walk us through that, when that catalyst moment was for you.
Well, it didn't happen in an instant, like you might imagine. There were a couple of pivotal moments. There's one that I keep going back to, and it was when I was doing my psychiatry training at Duke. In my first year, we had a required weekly seminar where we did what's called, what did we call it? A critical appraisal of the literature. And they gave us a specific method to do this. And we were essentially scrutinizing published papers that were usually clinical trials of psychiatric medications. And we came across this paper, and I think it was from JAMA, that a statistician, I think maybe even from Harvard or someplace like that, analyzed all of the antidepressant trial data, not just the published studies, but he submitted a FOIA request to the FDA to get all the studies submitted to get approval from the FDA, that many of which were unpublished. And he combined them all into one data set and did a statistical analysis called a meta-analysis, which is a very powerful method if it's done well. And essentially, the conclusion was there's really no difference between antidepressants and placebo. And everyone, in my training class and the attendings who are, what we call the professors, they all agreed with that conclusion. But then an hour later, we were back in the clinic prescribing antidepressants. And to me, this was something wasn't right about that. It was so hypocritical, and it was so in your face because of the timing. It's like you walk from one room into the next room and then do the opposite thing, that you just did in the last room. And that really got me paying close attention to what was going on with the patients. And as I began to practice, I saw that psychiatric medications really, of all classes, not just antidepressants, with rare exceptions, weren't helping people. And in many occasions, they were making things much worse. And I got to observe more and more evidence of that over the years that I was practicing psychiatry, and it wasn't that long. And then as I made more and more of those observations and reached that conclusion, I just began prescribing less and less and taking people off medicines more and more, to the point that, at the time COVID hit, when I was still technically practicing psychiatry, all I was doing was taking teenagers off medications and trying to reach them in other ways, which I had learned. And early on in that experience, I came across Kelly Brogan's work. And that was kind of the second threshold that really pushed me into investigate natural healing. So I went from just being critical of allopathic medicine, specifically psychiatry, but it became a lot broader from that. And then shifted into really studying natural healing and seeing that actually there could be amazing outcomes. People can completely reverse all the chronic diseases that I was told, were incurable, and even cancers. So, I was on that path already when COVID hit. And, that, of course, was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, because as a result of my, realizations of what was going on there, I decided to get completely out of allopathic medicine and do things totally differently.
Dude, so I want to go back to the antidepressants, because that's a massive can of worms. I was researching, antidepressants and psychotropics, and I was reading the MOA a lot on these psychotropics and the antidepressants. And a lot of the verbiage that I saw on the MOA, the mechanism of action, was that I saw the word presumed a lot. And it wasn't, and if you look at the word presumed, it's like guessing. A lot of I'm kind of butchering exactly what it said, but it's something like along the lines that is presumed to increase the uptake of serotonin or whatnot. But I'm like, well, presumed is like a BS definition, or just a guess. And it's like, man, do you want to be guessing with this type of medication that's going to supposedly alter chemistry, hormone, everything, the brain, function of the brain? And it's scary. So, I mean, when it comes to these psychotropics, we see mental illness on the rise now more than ever before. Okay, more people are anxiety-ridden, depressed, even schizophrenia. And what are your thoughts on, like, is there any psychotropic that you would recommend? Do you feel like any psychotropic is safe? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's so much to unpack there, Ben, because the deeper you look, the more holes in the story you're going to find. So, for example, just the the diagnosis itself or the definition of mental illness is an ever-changing thing. Every few years, they come out with a new version of the book and add more and more mental illnesses. And since the modern drugs came into existence, right, since kind of late 80s, early 90s with Prozac, I believe, being the first one, or maybe there was one that wasn't as commercially successful that came before that. There's kind of been, that's the explosion could be related partly to that these drugs exist. They're heavily marketed. They're mostly prescribed by primary care doctors, not by psychiatrists. And primary care doctors don't even have any training in diagnosing mental illness. And for my forensic work in the past, I was involved in a lot of, malpractice cases, disability cases, criminal cases, and I reviewed tons of mental health records. And there are many that were, people that I evaluated that were treated by primary care doctors. And like, this is the extent of their evaluation to diagnose depression. Oh, are you depressed? Yes. Are you having thoughts of suicide? No. Diagnosis, depression. That's really it. I don't think they asked any other questions. So that's not really very rigorous or reproducible in the sense of what is going on. Now, is there a lot of unhappiness, dissatisfaction, agitation among the general population? Yes. Is it mental illness? I think that's a separate question, but even whether it is or not, certainly it's resulted in crazy amounts of prescriptions of these drugs.
Right.
I mean, we have even antipsychotics being prescribed as sleep medications. They're among the top selling drugs, and they're extremely poisonous. There's a study in Tennessee looking at teenagers who are prescribed antipsychotics, which, is another kind of big scandal of an issue. And they were in significant numbers just having sudden death, like dropping dead. When I saw sudden death among the athletes after the COVID injections came out, I was immediately reminded of this from antipsychotic medications, that this kind of sequela from a pharmaceutical is definitely not unheard of. And it's tragic. And even despite the publication of that study, still prescribing those medications for teenagers left and right.
Right. Well, excuse me, I had a little bit of a tickle in my throat, but I think, there is a absolute overprescribing in these, and I think there is a misdiagnosis occurring, or just how do you say it? I mean, they're almost trigger happy to throw these diagnoses out to get people medications. And I think depression is, I think it's at one point a normal emotion that we are supposed to go through at times in life. It's kind of like the sun can't shine all the time. Now, there might be some clinical cases where these people are, depressed, but is the solution throwing more medication at them? Excuse me.
I mean, I've seen, people that are severely impaired to the point that they can't live independently. They can't even live really safely in society, at least temporarily, due to some form of mental illness. Mm-hmm. But this is not, generally speaking, the majority of people who are taking these drugs. These folks that I'm describing, who are really impaired, they're generally prescribed, 5 to 10 different psychiatric drugs,
right,
of every class. But in terms of like the textbook description of, someone who's severely depressed and just, doesn't want to get out of bed or eat or anything like that, I've never really seen that in real life with all the thousands of psychiatric cases I've seen. With schizophrenia, I've seen tons of people who are, clearly psychotic in a way that, they talk to themselves and have conversations. They believe things and interact with things that we can't perceive or see, right? And they can exhibit extremes of behavior in both, disgusting ways and in very strange ways.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if you were around any of these people, you would immediately know that they were existing in a different reality than you. Now, do those drugs help them? No, they don't. In fact, here's something really fascinating. I came across this when I was doing totally separate research. I was trying to look into coffee enemas because there's no clinical studies of coffee enemas, even though anecdotally they've helped thousands of people, recover completely from cancer and many other illnesses. But nevertheless, I found a paper from the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the leading journals, most prestigious, but it was from 1932. And in it, there was a doctor at a state psychiatric hospital who was treating patients with colonics. And he had two types of, diagnoses, and the diagnoses are a little bit different back then, but not that different. And one of them were people with schizophrenia, which they called dementia precox. And the other group of people had what's called a psychotic depression, which is essentially very similar to schizophrenia, but it's said to be occurring in an episode of depression. And these are, in the modern day, what I was taught in my training was that schizophrenia is incurable and that they need lifelong treatment. And psychotic depression is the most severe form of depression and the most refractory to treatment. And episodes can last a long time and be very severe. So in the group of people with schizophrenia, 70% of them, after a few colonics and nothing else, were either well enough to leave the hospital and go home or completely in remission from their psychosis.
That's
now this, so that was in 1932 with
right.
Flushing some water up their butt, right? A pretty simple and safe procedure. And now here we are, 80, 90 years later, giving poisonous drugs that, according to research studies, shorten their lifespan, cause sudden death and other problems, make them fat and have metabolic syndrome, very poor quality of life. And, it's a totally different outlook and prognosis when maybe we could have refined that procedure and have a way to reverse almost all these cases.
Dude, I love the illustration of the wilted plant. And I've said this many times before, but it's like, the modern, how do you say it? The modern allopathic doc, if they look at a wilted plant, they want to cut off the leaves or medicate or vaccinate the plant, but give the plant water and it can be well. Or give the water up its butt. It'll be even better, right? The coffee enemas. But I love that. And I've heard that through Max Gerson. The Gerson therapy is real big on the coffee enemas. And I feel like the colonics, there's so much to unpack there because, you hear that and, the science to it, when you do the coffee enema, it releases the glutathione. I believe that's the glutathione peroxidase. I believe that's what it releases. I could be wrong. I heard it squeezes the liver like a sponge and then it releases the antioxidant in the body. Is that one of the benefits, would you say? What are some other benefits of some of these colonics that occur from a physiological level in the body?
Well, I mean, to me, those things, and I have heard the same exact explanation, but I don't know what that's based on, if that's actually based on, real research or if it's theoretical. But to me, what's much more important is, well, what happens when people do these? So we know from, thousands of people who've done Gerson therapy that for a certain subset of cancers, and it's a pretty large subset, people respond amazingly. And many of them essentially are cancer-free after. Now it's combined with juicing and, a clean diet. But I think coffee enemas is, the most important component. I know for me, when the first time I experimented with it, I did 2 coffee enemas a day for 2 weeks, and my fruit allergies were gone. In fact, I never really knew there was a connection between asthma, allergies, eczema, and the liver until I first heard about it from Dr. Jennifer Daniels. And then when I tried doing this and got rid of those allergies, it was, like confirmation for me that that's what was going on. It was, a big part, important part of my learning, because the liver is really one of the key organs to health. And, despite that there's a complete lack of clinical studies of coffee enemas in the literature, there is quite a literature on coffee itself. Now, it is mostly epidemiologic, but nevertheless, it is overwhelmingly positive that, there are lower cancers, liver disease, hepatitis, even though it's imaginary, it represents something going on.
Right.
And all these things are much, much better when people have some exposure to coffee. Even when I was in my psychiatry training, there was a study that suggested that coffee may lower your suicide risk. And this was very significant because we knew there was no intervention at all that was proven to reduce your suicide risk. So we could do, anything with the patients that have a high risk of suicide, but we knew nothing we did would change that, other than, locking them up could temporarily prevent them if you watch them carefully,
Right.
but nothing in the long term. So this was exciting, but, we're like, oh, it's one study. So I recently looked, and it turns out that the study's been repeated a couple of times in larger data sets, and it's shown to have the same correlation.
Good. Andy, I want you to write this on paper and send it to my wife. She harps on me for drinking. Okay. She harps on me for drinking too much coffee as it is.
Well, there is a point of diminishing returns. So supposedly it's 2 to 4 cups is the sweet spot.
Dang. Okay. All right. So I'll keep it to two cups a day then. But there's times where my kids are like, Daddy had too much coffee. I'm bouncing off the walls. I'm super hyper. And I talk really fast. I already talk sometimes a little too fast, and I mumble.
I was going to say, Ben, you're starting out with a kind of high energy personality, so you can definitely amp it up too much.
Yes, right. I just did a radio show a little bit ago, and I'm like, I got done going, I talk so fast. I sound like an auctioneer. Like they probably didn't even know a word I was just saying, because I had so much coffee and I was jazzed up. And so today I had a little bit of extra coffee today because I had to I didn't sleep too well last night. Because I had to get up super, super early. And every time I do that, my internal clock doesn't let me sleep. It wakes me up super early and I just get up. But so I had a little bit of extra coffee today. So I'd like to know, do you like it black? How do you drink your coffee?
Yeah, I'm a purist, and also, so I do drink coffee just completely black. Of course, I wouldn't add sugar or a sweetener.
Yes.
But even, it's somewhat debatable if coffee sets off a digestion, depending on how quick you drink it and such. But if you're, adding dairy to it, then you're definitely making it a meal.
Well, I know the topic today is masculinity, and that was a trick question because real men drink their coffee black. So you did well. You did well. You passed the test there, so that's good. I mean, these fruity coffees, they're more of a shake than anything. I drink my coffee black, and that's the way I like it. It brings out the flavor. Now, how do you have a pour over? Do you do French press? I'm sure I see you having like a fancy pour over coffee. But
I've tried all the different mechanisms, and I've tried all kinds of beans and roasts and such. And to be honest with you, I like drip coffee the best. But it's got to be the right machine, because most, in fact, I would say, over 90% of the drip machines out there will not make a decent cup of coffee. A lot of times they just make it too hot and it burns the beans, I think. But, the French press, that's my camping trip coffee. So I do, have one and take it around. And I've even, messed with Turkish coffee before and percolators. So
yeah, that's great, man. I think we could just probably have a whole conversation on coffee alone, but I'd love to know where you get the drip coffee. I want to see this drip machine, because I want you to maybe text me a link to something I can get there, because I
think if it's Krups is the one company that I've not gone wrong with.
Okay. How do you spell
it?
And
I've even bought the real fancy brands, but it's German, so they tend to make things very well. Mm-hmm. But just KRUPS.
Okay, you got it, my man. Well, I know we talk about masculinity, but have you seen just kind of in your line of work, maybe just a decline in men's health overall. I know we kind of joked about, the masculinity type side of things, but I know we're at a warfare in all areas of life, but I feel like men especially are being targeted. And I feel like men now are sicker now more than ever before. We have more financial stress, we have more emotional stress, chemical stress, spiritual stress. And would you agree with that statement? And why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I can only speak from experience, over the course of my lifetime. And I remember as a young kid that the only recollection I have of seeing men kind of be weak and frail and sickly was when they were really old. And, like I remember going down to Florida and visiting some much older relatives at the end of their life and kind of, seeing that, and they were medicalized and smelled weird and that kind of stuff. But it seemed that most men, just, around fathers, middle-aged guys were pretty vigorous from my vantage point. Now, that could be a bias of my memory, but as I began to get experience in the medical field, as a young adult, I began to see like the degree of poor health that was out there. Partly it was getting exposed to people of different lifestyles, and because I think I was maybe a little bit sheltered being in a cosmopolitan area and then being at a fancy college. But this, I'm interacting with, people from all over the state, all walks of life. They coming to the hospital because of health problems. And, I just saw so much, and especially it seemed like God, every man was destined to have prostate problems and prostate cancer. And, I just kind of saw it more and more. And then I started to see young people getting diabetes and, seeing basically the younger generation than I was, like being in their 20s and already like being overweight and having man boobs and things like this, where that, there was only an occasional guy that looked like that, it seemed like, in my generation. Now it seemed like that was, there was almost no one who didn't look like that to some degree. Even going to Southern Europe, like Spain, when I went there in the 90s for the first time, versus when I went back in 04, so like 10 or 12 years later, I saw so much difference in the way the Spanish people looked in terms of, obesity and such.
Dude, I can't even imagine. I mean, I know what it's like having man boobs because there was a time in my life when I was overweight. I was about 65 pounds heavier than I am now. And I don't know if you know the orthopedic test for man boobs. Are you familiar with the pencil test?
No, I don't know actually.
Yeah. So if you lift up the boob and put a pencil and lower the boob, and if the pencil stays, congrats, you just tested positive for man boobs.
I see.
That's not a real.
That's very clever.
Yes, but
it figures orthopods would come up with that.
I think we could probably patent that. But it's one of those things where it was debilitating for me, and it's like, well, why did that occur? I mean, I was eating whatever I wanted. I was like a moth into the light anytime I saw Hardee's, and so it's one of those things where I just ate a bunch of junk, probably a bunch of phytoestrogens in the diet, and it affected my levels of testosterone. I probably put my estrogens through the roof, and then I decided to change my life and my lifestyles, and I started working out, and thank the Lord those man boobs went away, and now I'm sizzled chest and pecs are hard as rocks. Just kidding, but but my body adapted, and I've changed, and now I'm preaching it. So what is it though in America? I mean, we have such confusion with just what it means to be healthy, and masculinity seems to be under attack. And it's one of those things where you see it in our society, you see it in our television, where, I remember growing up when the movies portrayed the man as a masculine man and like doing those things and being the hero. And now it's like this feministic view where the woman is now the hero and the man is like a weak symbol here. And why do you think there is a war on masculinity?
Well, I do think there is one, and you pointed really to two major aspects of it, that there are the cultural influences, and even through the pop culture especially. And then there's also this kind of chemical assault. And, I think really what helps us understand the goals of this the most is to look back in history, and specifically to look at the origins of feminism, honestly, and also, looking at the sort of globalist influences and technocratic influences, and a lot of these are driven really by occultists, dark occultists who are practicing Luciferianism. And that there are reasons, and different, I think, people who are involved in these methods may have slightly different motivations for really engineering our society in a certain way. One thing that is the most obvious is that men, are the strength in terms of providing safety, and the ones, who would have to fight back in defense or, protect against tyranny. So if you wanted to completely control and manipulate a society, you would want to make the men weak.
Mm.
That's one aspect. Now, there's a lot of other aspects to this that have to do with economics also. Bringing women into the workforce accomplishes a couple of things. So one is that it brings down the price of labor, because now you've doubled the supply of labor in the markets, and that's been shown to actually have occurred since the 60s, when women did go back into the workforce at much higher rates. You also increase the tax revenue, which has also been shown empirically to have occurred. And then you create a reliance on other third parties essentially to raise the children. If there are children, another aspect is that you decrease the amount of children, and that also is shown empirically in the data. But you allow the children to be, raised by others, whether it be daycare or extended hours at school, or just being in school rather than being in the home. And if you go back to the origins of feminism in the 1800s, it actually does correspond with compulsory schooling to some degree. So this allows, if you really want to change the culture, you have to start with the young generation, because it's much more difficult to, if someone's already acculturated to certain mores and practices and beliefs, you can't change that very easily in that generation. But if you start with children and acculturate them to a different culture from the beginning, and there are many historical examples where they can even turn them against their parents because of the culture clash, right? And have them report their parents to the government and such, like
yes.
Happened in communist countries and Nazi Germany.
Well, so I love what you said about the feminism and compulsory schooling. We homeschool, and
as do we.
Yeah, and that's another thing we have in common. And I think that's, homeschooling is an extension of the family, and public school is an extension of the government. And I can't even imagine. I have going back to the time struggle. I feel like I don't have enough time in a day right now. And it's like I go home and it's like I spend time with my kids and try to maximize that time and being present with my kids. Present time consciousness is a real thing, but being present with the children and being intentional with the children and being with them is important. I can't even imagine having the kids in school for God knows how long a day, and then having just a couple hours at night with them. And I'm not here to
don't forget they have homework too. So
homework,
a couple
right.
hours may shrink down.
Exactly right. And I'm not here to condemn those people or parents or people that are listening that have their kids in public school, but I pray that this convicts you to maybe look at other options to be able to maximize your time with your kids. But again, I mean, I can see that. And if you look at like a lot of these tyrannical people in our government right now, like Hillary Clinton said that children they are owned by the government, like that they're their products. I'm like, no, that's not exactly true. And you see that now more than ever before. And if you look at the history of homeschooling, we had to really fight for that right. And it never used to be that way. It was just that since the industrial age, I feel like that we really had to fight for our right and freedoms to homeschool our children. And it's comical and to me that we even have to have that discussion. Like, oh, you're telling me that I don't have the right to teach and educate and raise my children. You want the government to do that? No, thank you. I mean, and so I love that that you brought that up to that point, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. And my kids are different, and I'm sure your kids are as well. I mean, the beautiful thing about homeschooling is there's a quote out there that's like, if you teach or judge an elephant by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to believe its whole life it's stupid, right? And so if you look at our children, each one of our children, they learn differently. They have different interests. They have, God made them unique in their own way, and they learn different. They have different interests. Like my daughter loves baking. She does not like to read. She loves to bake and she loves to sew. And I mean, yesterday she made $100 in my office by selling ice packs and heat packs. Okay. She just sewed them together, and that's her interest. She loves to sew and create and be entrepreneurial. My other son, he reads, he is a reading machine. He'll read probably 5 books a week. He'll read for hours. He loves it. That's his entertainment. My other boys, like, they have different personalities. They like to just be out and about doing things hands-on. And I can't imagine sitting them down for 8 hours a day and what that would do to them. It's conforming their minds to really in a different way than God created them. And the freedom that we have with homeschooling allows them to reach their potential. So I think that's a fascinating point. But going back to how raising boys to men and going in that area, I know homeschooling is a great tool for them to be able to reach their masculinity in a way that's separate from the world. But going back to just men in general, and going back to the war on men, in your experience, I just want to know, what do you think is the biggest concern regarding our masculinity and men's health right now?
Well, if we look at this from the context of, humanity, I think we have to really look at families and procreation. And there's a number of issues around that that are all being simultaneously, attacked. So one thing is that the culture, and a lot of it does root in feminism, and it tells women, right, that they should be independent and that they don't need a man or to get married. And this, the result of that many times is that they don't have children. And if we look at the birth rates and the fertility rates, now fertility is a separate issue, right, because that's when a woman actually wants to have a baby, right, but is unable to. But also we have the fact that many fewer women want to have babies. So this, and then we have the fertility aspects from the man's point of view too, right? That we have major reduction in sperm counts. In fact, they're less than half they were in the 1970s. And the acceleration in the decline of sperm counts has increased since 2000. It's over 2.5% a year reduction. And this is not just confined to the United States or the Western world. This is worldwide.
Can you say that one more time? Say that one more time for me. There's a reduction.
The sperm count of the average sperm count of men from 1972 to I think 2017 has gone down by over 50% worldwide.
Dude, that is such a profound statement. I'm not saying that's not true, but I believe that to be true. I mean, think about that. So from 1970, what? You said 72
72, yes.
to 2017, the testosterone levels in men worldwide have gone down 50%.
The sperm counts.
So I'm sorry, sperm count.
Yeah, sperm
So,
counts have gone down.
so that opens up a can of worms. I'm thinking like, okay, Bill Gates depopulation agenda. Why do you think there's a issue with this? I mean, is there a conspiracy here? What is going on with our fertility?
Well, there certainly could be a conspiracy, but I don't have direct evidence of it. But what I think is really the problem is what you could call endocrine disrupting chemicals. Now, I recently, looked at the research on this, and I just found one paper after the next finding a variety of chemicals known to be toxic to the endocrine system and to the sexual reproductive system in the seminal fluid, right, in semen, one after the other after the other. And then other studies that directly show, either from animal models or from epidemiology correlations, the levels of these chemicals to be associated with abnormalities of sperm, with abnormal shapes, decreased or increased motility, and other problems. So I think, and we're exposed to these through many different ways. Some of them we actually were exposed to in our mother's belly and through her breast milk. These are called persistent organic pollutants, and many of them haven't been used in decades. They've been taken off the market because of known toxicity, yet still in 2020 and beyond, they're found in our bodies time and time again. And I'm talking about things like DDT. Like, you remember that story about DDT and polio, right? That goes way back. I'm talking about PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. I think they were taken off the market in 1979, still found in everyone's body. And then we're talking about things that are still used, even though this is known about, like PFOAS, which is the non-stick surfaces that are used, on cookware, waterproof clothing, Rain-X, all kinds of things like that have that, repellent barrier to water.
So what?
Flame retardants.
So on that, just speaks my curiosity. One question I get all the time is, what cookware? What kind of cookware do you use, Andy?
Well, I use stainless steel
Stainless
cookware.
steel. Okay.
And I think there's some ceramic cookware that is safe to use. Cast iron pot is okay. Just keep in mind that you will get some iron from it that you will ingest.
Right.
But that could be okay. Glass is just fine to use.
So what about like oils? What oils would you recommend?
I'd recommend animal fat.
Yeah, perfect.
So lard, tallow, bacon grease. I think that using a little bit of coconut oil, virgin coconut oil, is okay. It has pretty low levels of linoleic acid. Using some occasional, it's got to be the real olive oil, because
Right.
there's a lot of imposters out there. But like using it for a salad dressing or a marinade, you don't want to cook with it. And then possibly the best thing to cook with is butter, and clarified butter or ghee, because we know that if it's grass-fed, it has all the essential fat-soluble vitamins, especially useful for children for proper bone and jaw development.
So I know some of these like hydrogenated oils and these seed oils are highly inflammatory. How would they affect men's health? Why should we avoid them?
Yeah, well, this is part of the problem. I mean, in many, many different ways. And a lot of this information has been suppressed, but these, seed oils really were originally machine lubricants. The first one was cottonseed oil, which was made into Crisco. And then now we've had a number of varieties, but what you don't know about these is, one, some of them are so poisonous that they had to modify the plant first to make a version of it that wouldn't kill you, right? And that's what canola is. Canola was a rapeseed before that, right? And it's been modified to have a lower amount of a particular poison that would be lethal or make you very sick. But the other thing is that these oils are often rancid, because as soon as they're pressed and exposed to the air, they become oxidized, and they're unpalatable. Like, you'd smell it, it'd be, you know what a rancid oil smells like. It's pretty bad. So they have to use various kinds of processing, usually with high heat, to get the smell out and make it neutral enough that people will actually consume it. And they probably put fragrances in it as well to, you know, make it more appetizing for people to eat. But these toxic oils, they've been found accumulating in your body. They mix with your membrane lipids, right? Or they say the phospholipids that make up your cell membranes. But however, when they do studies and they fractionate the cells, they find the seed oils accumulating in the body mixed in with the cell membrane lipids. And so they don't go away. They have some evidence that they alter various metabolic functions, including like hunger signals, fat storage, things like that. They could modify insulin. They can result in oxidative damage. So there's been some data that was really suppressed from the 70s, where they did large randomized controlled trials with having people use seed oils in their diet versus animal fats or butter. And those studies found increased mortality from the people who ate seed oils.
Was it heart disease?
This was the overall mortality, but yeah, most of the deaths were from cardiovascular.
I mean, because you're seeing that now, an explosion of cardiovascular, and we see these seed oils in everything. And it drives me bonkers when I go to these health food stores, these natural health food stores, and you see canola oil being touted. You see all these seed oils being touted as healthy. But what it's going to do is cause more problems. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what these seed oils are doing in the body.
Yeah.
So I love that we're talking about this. But I mean, do you think that this is playing a massive culprit in men's health when it comes to like heart attacks and cardiovascular health? Why are we having more heart attacks?
Well, I don't think this explains why men have more heart attacks, but it definitely is an important culprit. And, you know, it's interesting because the way that they justify it as a health food, and many people do report it that way, right, is because it is shown to lower certain cholesterol parameters. But the thing is, those cholesterol parameters are actually not a cause of any disease. There's a big, mistake about the significance of cholesterol and heart disease. Now, when it comes to the difference in heart attacks between men and women, is quite interesting because, first of all, the mortality from heart disease in men and women is not different, even though men have roughly twice as many heart attacks overall. If you drill down more carefully, what you see is that young men have considerably more heart attacks than women, and the difference diminishes gradually until really after menopause, and then it really drops off pretty quickly, and over 90 years of old there's no difference. Okay, so we see that men in their younger years are, overall in that range from, a young adult up until the rough menopause age of women. Men have overall twice as many heart attacks. So I looked at this pretty carefully, and I actually think that these fat-soluble toxins, like the seed oils, because there are a number of these chemicals that accumulate in our fat tissue over the course of our lifetime. And of course, as they accumulate, at some point they can spill out and then, cause an overt problem like a heart attack. And I think that this link is likely to be causal. So what is different between men and women? During those ages, right, there are two things. One is that women menstruate, and the other thing is that women can have babies and nurse. Okay? Now, I found pretty solid evidence that these particular fat-soluble toxins are present in the women's genital fluids. Like, for example, the follicular fluid that bathes the eggs in the ovary, and that some of that gets secreted into the uterus each month during ovulation. And also, even in the menses fluid itself, in the menstrual blood, they have found these particular type of fat-soluble toxins. They've also found them in actually quite high quantities in breast milk. So during women's reproductive years, they essentially have a monthly way to detox these fat-soluble toxins out of their body. And then if they have children, they can nurse it out of their bodies. Now, it may be bad for the infant, but it could be good for the mother if you're willing to look at it that way. Now, it turns out that if you look closely at the heart attack data, that guess what? Women have fewer heart attacks if they have longer reproductive years. So in other words, if their menopause is at a later age versus an earlier age, they have less heart attacks. So that means, essentially during all the time they're monthly detoxing, they have fewer heart attacks. Now, also, if we look at nursing, the specific time of nursing that the woman spends in her lifetime. So, across multiple kids, how many months overall she nurses, the more she nurses, the lower the likelihood of heart attacks. So that heart attack data kind of backs up the hypothesis I have that essentially women have fewer heart attacks because their reproductive system gives them these ongoing detox opportunities. And it's these fat-soluble toxins that accumulate and store in our body that our body has a real hard time getting rid of. Women can get rid of these through those reproductive pathways because nature always provides that efficiency. Like, it doesn't want to do just one thing. So it's not just about the reproductive cycle, it's also the detox, and that supports the reproductive cycle, because if the woman's body has less toxins, then it's going to be better able to grow a healthy baby. And we as men don't have these ongoing detoxes. So basically, we just continue to accumulate these toxins, and then they cause twice as many heart attacks for us. And that's what I think is going on. So the next part of it is, how do we get these things out of our body and achieve what women's bodies do for them naturally?
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I've also heard data, and I've read data that women that breastfeed, if you breastfeed your child, you're basically diminishing your chances of breast cancer by like 99%. And so
that's true.
So I encourage you.
And it could be, Ben, it could be the same mechanism because, the breast has a lot of fatty tissue, right? So any part of your body that has fatty tissue accumulates these types of toxins. That includes even the visceral fat, like the fat that's around the abdominal organs and such. So the breast fat also accumulates them. And then if you're nursing, right, then you're getting rid of it out of the breast. If it stays in the breast, then over time, as it accumulates, it could end up, ultimately resulting in a malignancy.
I think that's so interesting. So, Dr. Andy, what would be some solutions here for men listening? I know that you have some big things on your plate. You're doing some awesome things here, about to be released here. Why don't you just shine some light on that and give us some solutions for the people listening?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more teaching and developing protocols to address these issues in more depth. But really, overall, there's a twofold strategy. And before I explain that, let me just kind of bring home this point again about there's different types of toxins. Some, I'm going to divide them into two categories based on solubility. So there's water-soluble toxins, and some of those are these xenoestrogen compounds, right? Ones that basically have a feminizing effect on our body. And two of those are from plastics called phthalates and bisphenols. Probably most people have heard of BPA, that's a bisphenol, but it's not just BPA, it's all of them in that class. And these are both water soluble. So if you stop exposing yourself to these, within a few days they'll be out of your body, and then your body can start to recover from any toxicity from being exposed. And those things are plasticizing chemicals. So, for example, one of the biggest sources of getting those is in food storage. And especially if you microwave your food in plastic, you're releasing those things right into the food. They can also be in various types of synthetic plastic clothing fibers, which especially, if it's underwear right next to your manliness, it can be absorbed through the skin. So these are some of the simple things to change, and also in various hygiene products, especially the ones with fragrances. Phthalates are often used in fragrances. So having an unscented, or fragrance-free rather, not unscented, because that has masking things to cover up scents, but you want it fragrance-free products, and there are ways to find really clean products if you need to use these products at all. You might just kind of question, do I really need these things?
Right.
So eliminating your exposure by changing some of those lifestyle habits and what products you use is, definitely key. And for the water-soluble toxins, that's all you need to do, and your body will do the rest, and your health will improve with respect to those particular toxins. Now, with those other kind, the fat-soluble toxins I was talking about, that stay and accumulate in your body in the fatty tissue, those don't just go away when you stop exposing yourself to them. But you certainly can, get rid of the nonstick pans and the, moisture wicking fabrics and waterproof fabrics that are touching your skin, and the water repellent furniture and the, furniture coatings that you do, for stain repellent. Like, those are all the kinds of things that contain these chemicals, of course, certain pesticides as well. So you can reduce and eliminate your exposure to those chemicals, but they're still going to be in your body from the ones that are already there. So to get those out of your body, you need to actually lose fat and break down fat, or initiate what's called lipolysis, that the fat cells start to break down, and that's what releases them. And they can be eliminated from your body both through the liver and the gallbladder system, and also directly into the intestines. But you need to do this a little bit cautiously, because, for example, in animal studies with fasting, what they found is that they get liberated from the fat during the fasting, but then they can translocate to other organs. So you need to make sure that they get all the way out of the body. And there are different ways to approach this. I'm certainly, have my own protocols. Like, I have the Power of Pine workshop we're using healing solvents derived from pine trees that can help dissolve these toxins out of the body and help the liver and intestines eliminate them. You want to have some kind of bowel and liver regimen that can help, basically, as soon as these things get delivered, that your body can eliminate them. Simple things like enemas, or doing juicing, doing coffee enemas, liver flushes, using milk thistle, lots of different approaches to support these things being cleansed out of your body.
Dr. Indy, I love it. I love it. I love all the wisdom that you bring. You're just a wealth of knowledge here. And so I feel like I've learned so much just by sitting down and talking with you. There's times where I feel like you get naive, and you're in this area, and you feel like you know everything. And then I sit down with guys like you, and I just feel so humbled. It's like, man, the wealth of knowledge you bring, I think is so valuable, and it's so needed right now, because, so many people are starving for this information, and, we just can't take that for granted. And just bringing that information to the table here, and just being able to talk about it, and really, guide men in this area, and really navigating these waters is so important, because there are things out there that affect our health and affect our ability to function well and our potential. And so, I've heard about the plastics. I know these estrogen, how do you say it? I don't know if they're called inducing chemicals, but they're definitely, endocrine disruptors in these plastics. And I try to limit my plastic exposure. I don't even own a microwave. And so, but I grew up on microwave food, probably why I had man boobs. It's, it's
That
one of
could
those,
be part of it for sure.
and I grew up, we got excited when we saw the Schwan man pull up, and we got every microwavable dinner we could possibly get from him. It's one of those things. So it's like, looking back, I'm like, goodness, why did we grow up that way? But it's like, but I've changed. We've changed drastically from that. We don't, like I said, we don't own a microwave. We try to grow as much food as we can on our own. I got a mushroom farm going. We got bees. We got, so we got chickens. And so we're trying to go back to, 100% almost being independent from the grocery stores. But it's just comical because, you're saying, hey, we need to go back to the animal fats and getting butter. And that's what we've done. We've gone away from that. But I remember growing up thinking that, oh, too much butter was bad and the fats were bad. But, it's like the sugar industry, like they targeted the fat industry to try to get people off their trail. And it's like, the fats are good. We need these good fats in the diet and not this processed junk.
Before we had these seed oils and margarine and the trans fats, people really didn't have heart attacks.
Right. Yes. I mean, and now it's like the number one killer. This cardiovascular heart disease is the number one killer. And you have to ask yourselves why. Why aren't we addressing the elephant in the room? I mean, it's just so backwards to how we're supposed to live. I mean, I feel like the closer we get to nature, the healthier we become. And again, nature doesn't need interference. It doesn't need any help. It just doesn't need interference. And so I love this conversation. I feel like you and I can talk all day, and I love it. I think we should do this again. But I'm going to give you the last word here because I know we had 60 minutes here, but I want to give you the last word on where people can find you. Tell us where people can, again, find you in your social medias and just give us a 60-second rundown here.
Yeah, sure. Well, my website is the best place, and if you sign up for my newsletter there, we'll keep you informed about all my offerings and all my media that comes out, and that's andrewkaufmanmd.com. I have a weekly live stream, which is generally a well-researched lecture on a topic like why do men have more heart attacks than women, for example. And that's every Wednesday at noon, and it's broadcast live to my Instagram, Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. And it should be under Dr. Andrew Kaufman is my moniker. All those channels, so you can find me pretty much anywhere out there. And then I kind of alluded to some research that I've really been doing on men's health and focusing on that. And I'm going to be launching a great service for men. But before that, I'm giving a free 3-class mini course called the True Masculinity Mini Course. And the first one is going to be what is masculinity? The second one is going to be all about men's nutrition. And the third installment will be detailed information about these chemical assaults against your masculinity and how you can combat them, for your health. So I urge people to sign up for that. It'll be June 4th, 6th, and 8th, I believe. 3 free lectures, and they have free PDF resource guides that come with them as well.
That is a lot. I like to think I'm busy. Man, holy smokes, Dr. Andy. Okay, so tell me, I really want to end it on this. Give me a synopsis of your definition of masculinity. What is masculinity coming from Dr. Andrew?
Yeah, so masculinity is the natural male principle, which includes attributes such as leadership, personal development, the responsibility to provide safety, resources, protection, and also the ability to create, right? Because if we look at the infrastructure of our world, it was almost exclusively built by men. So this is, these are our roles as true men in the world. And of course, part of that is balancing that with our feminine side, because we all have both masculine and feminine attributes. It's just that men, we have, predominantly, or we're dominant in the masculine traits, and we need to make sure that those are fully developed, but we need to always balance it with the feminine, because that is, one, our way to relate to women and to nature. And it helps us a lot of times because, whenever you're too much in one extreme versus another, you can get lost. You could become overly aggressive and violent, for example, right? Which we see happen to some men. And also, if you indulge too much in the feminine aspect, you can be pushed around and lose your way. So there needs to be that right balance with, a dominant of those masculine traits, but also with a good relationship with nature, being able to show vulnerability, to experience intense emotions when it's appropriate and for our benefit, and to be able to utilize our intuition, sometimes just to keep us in check and sometimes to give us creative inspiration in how we can actualize the masculine principles of leadership and creativity and build things.
Dr. Andrew, I love it, brother. I love what you're doing. I think there's a massive need for this. We need to make, masculine come back to its roots. And I love it, man. I think people are starving for this. And again, there's a war on men. There's a war on masculinity. So I'm thankful to be interviewing you and talking with you today, Dr. Andy. I love you, brother, and I love what you're doing. Keep fighting the good fight. And I love the quote by Martin Luther King Jr. He states that the ultimate measure of man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenges and controversy. So, and I always tell my boys, because I'm not the biggest and strongest man of all, but I always tell my kids, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
That's right.
So we got to keep pursuing and being the salt and light of the earth, not the sugar. And so I love it. Dr. Andy, thank you so much, brother. I will tag you on social media. Go follow Dr. Andy, sign up for his newsletter, follow his stuff. He's a wealth of knowledge. I just don't bring anybody on my podcast. Andy is my first guest. He is willing to come be interviewed by me. So God bless him for that. Go follow him, sign up with his newsletter, and you'll learn a lot. Okay, God bless you, Dr. Andy. Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure, Ben.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?